welcome to another episode of CA Listens, Sparkling Conversations. And today, the topic of this podcast is actually decoding deception in finance and film. And again, you might have seen me too much. My name is Victor Lai, CA Singapore, ISCA member. And I'm here today with two people very well known in this sector, Lem from KPMG and Belinda from Grant Thornton. And so today we're going to talk about this interesting topic, and we're going to keep it a bit lighthearted, right? We're not going to be talking about serious crime, getting you into trouble.
But fraud, it has to be serious.
But it's actually about finance and film. So there is a link to a media angle. So I'm going to toss some questions to the two of you first. So can you explain the role of financial forensics in detecting fraud and financial crimes?
Okay, so to me, financial forensic is always about the evidence. So it's about getting the evidence from the books and records to prove certain wrongdoing or misconduct, or to prove that there isn't any wrongdoing or misconduct. So our role is really understanding all kinds of books and records, which may not be just financial reports or ledgers, but in today's world, it extends towards the computers, the mobile phones, the servers, data on the cloud. That's what we do to get evidence of fraud or misconduct.
To add on to Lem's point, it's also about piecing the picture together and then to present a case to then say, is this person guilty or otherwise, or whether the person has indeed, if he's then tagged to say that he has stolen some money or he has done something wrong, it's either to prove that that's indeed the case or to prove that he didn't do it. And from the evidence perspective, it's then down to the forensic accountants and the people who do the case to then prove how do I piece it together. Yeah.
So I'm going to pick out on something you said. I sense there are two elements, right? There is the hard evidence, the hard data, when you're looking at financial records. I think there's this element of, I think you mentioned a vibe, a gut feel that you get. I sense that there's a process whereby, you might be interviewing people. You have to talk to perhaps the alleged culprits, right? To investigate into these matters. It could be malfeasance, financial misappropriation. So I believe in that process. And this is the part I'm really interested in, right? There has to be some kind of sensing of verbal cues, behavioural indicators, whether there's a twitch or are they getting nervous. How much of that plays into your role when you do that part of the work?
And so alongside with what we were talking about in terms of building the case, there is also a portion of it where we call interviews, like what rightfully pointed out, Victor. Some portion of the interviews are information gathering, and then some portion of it which I quite enjoy is the interrogation part of it, where you get to the person to either say, no, I didn't do it, or yes, I did it. And to a certain extent, because it plays onto the human psyche of things, it gets very, very interesting because you're dealing with a fellow human being. And alongside with that, you will then have this element about understanding the psyche and also the rationale behind it. And when you're gathering the evidence, you're somewhat already piecing a picture together. And when you ask the questions, sometimes I do say that a portion of it does come with it in terms of the psyche and the psychology and the criminology of it. But alongside, the interesting bit about it is the twitching, the face going red, or the eyes going red, or your nose going red, or your ears going red, for example. Some people will even spread to the neck. But such things should not be taken in isolation, to be honest. And your psychologists and people who specialize in this field will then be able to tell us that. We usually take it in threes. So if a person twitches, sometimes the person's eye is itchy. Okay, it's not because the person is trying to lie to you, but if it actually comes in threes, person twitch, look away, and then starts moving. And then you know that the evidence is indication that he's done something wrong, and it was his email. The metadata says that it's indeed Bell who did it. Then you can kind of, your evidence speaks louder, the twitching plus 3, then kind of combine it.
Okay. Lem, yourself?
So for me, I think the sense, after being investigator for so many years, and more than 30 years for me, certainly, sometimes you have the sense of it. But as what I've said earlier, a sense, I can't base on sense and charge a person in court, or advise our client to charge a person in court. So that sense will only spur me to work harder to get the hard evidence, so that we can charge a person in court. So it's to me it's really good to have the sensing, and that sensing will then spur me and my team to work harder.
So this is very interesting. I'm going to ask for more specific examples, but before that, we swap to an anecdote, because I believe I think I might be very good at this, because when I was in the Big Four, I used to have to review with one of my ex-bosses, who is an ISCA member, by the way. So I hope she watches this. I'm very good at telling her cues on how agitated she will get during the reviews with me. So her level 1 agitation will be, she will start flicking her nails like this. And people who watch this will know exactly what I'm talking about. And then the second level, she'll start grinding her teeth like that. So that's her level 2 agitation. Then her level 3 agitation, she'll start bouncing in her chair. So I like to look out for these things, so I know how well the review is going. And if I'm hitting level 2, I might say, hey, I think we're running out of time. Maybe I book you again, right? So, So I'm quite interested in this area about behavioral aspects of it. So maybe back to Belinda, would you be able to perhaps discernibly give us some real life examples without giving yourself away? If need be, we can mosaic your face and do that voice. that voice thing, right? But you know what, in a discerning way, without giving yourself or any situation away, can you give us some specific examples on how the psychological aspect and the behavioral aspects of this interaction in your work has played into the outcomes of your investigations? Specific examples of behavior, psychology.
So it comes back to piecing the picture together. The team will go and have a look into the books and records, like what Lem said. And then we will also look into the electronic evidence. And when we actually piece this picture together, there will be questions, because there could very likely be possible explanations about things on why this person did whatever that he did. So to cite you an example, there was one time I was involved in a interview. And in the interview, we already knew about a forgery that happened to us. And in fact, we were able to decipher how the forgery happened. Yeah. And it was quite rudimentary, to be honest. And so basically the person cut the thing, based onto a new piece, then photocopy, and then gave it to us. Okay. So to me, it's quite rudimentary. It's not even deploying electronic stuff, which then make things slightly more complicated for us. I'm in no way encouraging people to do that. So when that evidence presented itself and we were preparing to interview this individual, when we met him, the cues from him, I remember vividly, because the person, there were a group of us that were interviewing. There were 3 of us that was interviewing, and when he turned to me and answered my questions, he was really nice. And so he answered the questions very gently. And then when he turned to another person, so let's say hypothetically it was Lem, he turned to Lem, and then his personality kind of switched and he became very defensive and very angry. And then when he switched to me, he was very gentle. And so that was the fluid situation about interviews, right? So that was the first thing. In terms of the way he was answering questions, was quite different. He gets very defensive with the other individual who was asking the question, and he was very gentle with me.
Well, why was that the case?
Good question, right? I don't know, to be honest. So at that point, when we were doing the tech team and asking the question, what we did was I then kind of pick up the thing and then became the back cop in a sense to ask about the forgery. So I remember that I asked that question. I said, so Mr. XXX, when you were giving us this evidence, this piece of paper, what exactly did you do? Part of the interview. So because he turned to me and was quite gentle with me, so I asked in that manner, and I asked him, so how was it that when you presented it? So I said, did you cut the evidence? You took the thing and you paste and then you photocopy and you gave it to me? Then he says, yes. He said, yes. So I said, okay, thank you. And then I turned to my counterpart who was sitting next to me and said, we can continue the question now. Then after that, when he turned to him again to continue asking the rest of the series of questions that we had for him, he became the other agitated person, very defensive. So it became very strange in terms of the psyche and attempting to even understand. I'm not a psychologist, so I won't be able to, and neither am I a criminologist, so won't be able to understand in terms of what was going on. But at the end of the day, right, as forensic investigators and forensic accountants, we would want to then say, collaborate the information, and then be able to then say that if we concluded that there was forgery in this case, all I needed to do was just to find out how he did it. And what I did was I kind of asked him those questions to say, did you cut this, you paste, then you photocopy, then you give it to me, right? Then
and that was so effective.
Yes.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
I better stop here. That was an excellent business development spiel from Grant Thornton. So I want to pass it to you to say, hey, do you want to one-up that, right? But before you go on, can you also add in this angle? Because Belinda mentioned something about collaborating with the psychology and criminology aspects of it. So maybe can you also tell us what's your experience with regards to that kind of collaborations?
I will flip it another way. So, instead of good cop, bad cop, right? And instead of looking at the behavior and psychic of the person that we interview, I think one critical juncture is also the behavior and psychic of the forensic accountant, of the investigator. So that's something that we often overlook. And so maybe I share a true story. Years ago when I was still in the police force doing commercial crime investigations. And I still remember there was this guy and I was doing, we call him a B because accused, we term them as a B subject, not the A. A is the witnesses. And this person came and I started my interview and very nice. It's like Hello Kitty kind of nice, right? Yeah, it's like, well, whatever that he said, I was like, good point, whatever. And I already have all the evidence that I have. And so I'll just go along with his evidence, recorded his statement, and I was smiling throughout and agreeing, what he said, and I put it in writing and he signed off. And after the sign off, I smiled and I took out my handcuff. I cuff him and I bring him to the lockup. So you can imagine the psychic on him, the impact on him. The next morning, I bring him out from the lockup and again I smile. And that juncture, he just told me everything and admitted everything.
Wow.
That's right. He's smiling at me right now, so I feel a bit nervous.
So you have to be careful. When I give you the Hello Kitty smile, you better be careful.
Hello Kitty has no mouth. So So, thank you. That's very interesting. Because so obviously there is an element. I think it comes from. I understand that Lem, you have experience with commercial crime in the police force. I think that's a very interesting angle, and I think that's a good segue to move into the next part of our session, right? Because we are not just talking about real life. We want to talk about portrayal in film, and perhaps we set some background here. So, like, over 20 over years in the accounting profession, and very on in the early days when people still watched a certain national broadcaster with their curated serials. In the early days, I would often lament, say, there are shows about, there are police shows, there are cop shows, right? There's shows about lawyers. There's shows about doctors. There's shows about sportsmen, swimming, whatever, right? There are never any shows about accountants or auditors, right?
There was a Hong Kong series about ICAC.
That's Hong Kong.
Yeah.
That's Hong Kong. It's a bit more interesting. But Singapore, we don't have that, right? So I always felt that the accounting profession was a bit underrepresented in our national media broadcaster, which obviously I'm not naming them. So, because nobody watches them now, right? But yeah, so we are often looking for a portrayal, and obviously sometimes when you watch cop shows, police shows, is obviously some dramatic portrayal, right? Likewise for healthcare, medicine, and then I had the answer to myself, which is that there's nothing to portray. This is so boring. I mean, this is the impression that I had, say, 20 over years ago. But clearly, I think that has evolved a lot, right? Because today we have a whole slew, a list of TV programs, dramas, movies about financial crime and even forensics. And also, I understand one of your favorite topics, which is anti-money laundering. Not money laundering.
Yes,
anti-money laundering. So, one of my favorite series was a Netflix series called Ozark. Very, very dramatized. And they had 4 seasons of it. I caught them very promptly whenever they launched the new seasons. And it was about a show based in the US about a very boring, but very stiff finance professional who was blackmailed by the Mexican drug cartel to help them launder their dirty drug money in the US. And it played out 4 seasons. And the way they did it was through cash-rich businesses, a bar, a restaurant, a floating casino, and of course there are a lot of dramatic elements to this, right? Him being blackmailed by the cartel, him being a double agent, right? Approach, and sandwiched between authorities that were on his back and also the cartel that was threatening his life. So that was Ozark. And I was hoping it would teach me something about money laundering, but it didn't. But I thought it was captivating enough, right, for it to be a popular series. So that's my favorite. So perhaps I send it back to Belinda. Do you have an equivalent of my Ozark that you have come across, and how do you feel about the portrayal of financial forensics and investigations, or malfeasance or fraud? I mean, how do you feel about how that has been portrayed in media and film?
My husband and I generally like to watch crime-related series, whether if it's documentary or movies or series. So lately, I've watched Inventing Anna. I've watched, and it's more crime-related than anything else. And I suppose it's because the producer will pick up a topic and then after that, from there, then develop. So things like Laundromat was, from what I recall, Panama Papers was out at that time, and then so that's why they could collaborate the information. But I really enjoy it because there were a lot of very famous actors and actresses in there. So generally, I'm quite intrigued when it comes to watching films and documentaries about such thing. I particularly enjoy Madoff as well, and also read the book. And there was also the $1 Billion Whale and things like that. So I think from books' perspective, it seems to, because it's in your own imagination, then you kind of, when you translate it into a movie, then you realize that, oh, that's how it's going to look like in real life, things like that. So the latest one that I watched was Dirty Money. And it was based on one episode, and then they feature each of the crime or each of the situation that has happened. So they pick up all this, the main thrust about the crime, and then after they build the story around it. So Dirty Money to me was slightly more factual than say Inventing Anna, where it's so-called giving people the impression that she's very rich, and then how she then came up with this idea about it. So depending on the storyline, right, I do think that there may be a certain level of sensationalizing. Yeah. It goes back to the point about trying to bring some attention to the profession to a certain extent, where it says that, so accountancy, that it's not just bean counting, but technically some of us are looking for stolen beans. So that's why it makes it slightly more interesting.
Or magic beans.
Magic beans, yeah. Or, depending on how you want to see it.
Lem, what's your favorite episode of Crime Watch?
Oh, that exposes my vintage. How can you do that?
They are still producing Crime Watch.
Really?
You can watch it on MeWatch.
Okay.
But having said that, I'm a big supporter of MediaCorp. So yeah.
So for me, it's whichever show that casts a fantastic light on forensic accountant or forensic investigator, I will like it. Okay, but joke aside, I think what I have come to realize is that the same fraud don't happen twice. So what it then meant is there's always possibility of different kind of scenario playing out. And sometimes it's quite amusing, and yet it works. Yeah. So and I think which is coming back to ISCA Financial Forensic Program. I just want to sell a bit of the program. In fact, the program was designed to help accountants, investigators deal with it, because they have sections in it that helps the investigator to not rely on the fact that, the same fraud will happen again, but to look at the scenario and plan out the investigation plan, and each will be very different from the next, so that, they can get the job done, get the evidence that they need. So, yeah.
So I think there's something more specific I want to ask because of his background with commercial crime. Some of the shows that you kind of compared and contrasted the format of some of the portrayal of what we're talking about in media, in film, in TV programs. And because I obviously have watched some of these crime shows as well, right? I figure that different formats that they use to sensationalize it, to make it appealing to viewers. And very often some of them are done in a way that focuses on the crime, that focuses on the intent. And so they look at it from the criminal's perspective. So they are kind of like producing the show in a way to make you root for the perpetrator, right? Can he get away with this, right? So sometimes the focus comes from the angle of the criminal. Then sometimes the formats of the program turn around and they focus from the perspective of the investigator, the law enforcement, the investigation aspects of it. So I guess even our viewers will have their own sense, right? Because obviously a lot of people watch this kind of programs. But then could you tell us a bit more about, really from that investigator's perspective, how sensational is it really? How, are there some juicy nuggets that, you can tell us that from your experience?
It's
in
not
the past,
it's
no,
always as glamorous as
yeah,
you say, right?
that's what I want to say. In the past, maybe. So you see, our operating environment changed. So for example, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we still need to go through files and files of records. And today, everything is in electronic form, for example. And I would say that if I look at the world going forward, maybe it is even more straightforward, which means it may not be so glamorous, so exciting. but it's exciting in its own way. Let me explain. So 14 years ago, you have heard about AI and machine learning in the last couple of years, or if not, particularly in the last 1 year. So Belinda, I'm very passionate about all these things. So I started branching into AI machine learning 14 years ago. And I was trying to use technology to detect fraud, financial crime, money laundering, etc. But the problem is that in fraud, the same fraud don't happen twice, and which is then I don't have labeled data that when this comes about, this is fraud. When this doesn't, this is not. So we do many crazy things. We even hire professors from universities in to try different ways and techniques. Then one day, a very junior colleague of mine, she just joined us virtually, and we were trying means and ways. And one day she came to me, she said, "Hey, Lem, I have this idea. Let me try and hope it works." And I gave her and the team working on it a very, very big data set. Millions, tens of millions of records. And it's a records on procurement. So very, very large data set. So they went back. And I still remember after 1 to 2 months, they came back. Lem, these are the top 10 most unusual transactions based on AI machine learning, as you call it. And when I look at them, the team doesn't know. But in this data set, they were real fraud cases charged in court. Of the 10, 9 were real fraud cases charged in court. Imagine, you have tens of millions of records, and it's nothing fancy. It runs, and it came out with a list, and of the list, 9 were real fraud cases charged in court of the 10. So what I want to share with you is that the way the world is changing very quickly. The operating environment is changing very quickly. So we are even going into that space where, when we talk about fraud investigation, detecting money laundering transaction, it may be just business as usual, and the alerts comes in and say, this transaction just happened 2 hours ago, look at it.
How did has that approach evolved since then?
Yes, for sure.
And when you mentioned 14 years ago, was that in KPMG or was that in the police force?
KPMG.
I see.
Yeah, but it was very tough. Imagine 14 years ago, you talk to a client about AI machine learning, and I can tell you most of the time when I leave the room after the meeting, I felt very lousy because they'll be looking at you and say, come on, don't waste my time, because it's not known. But if you talk about today, yes, more people understand. But I mean, I'm just sharing with you, I just don't want to create an environment where going forward, things will get more exciting. Maybe things will get less exciting. Yeah, but this is how the world is getting into. It's scary. So imagine the same kind of fraud detection technique then evolve where it goes into where it arms the future of the forensic investigators doing investigation going forward. It arms compliance officers of organizations detecting money laundering transactions, sanctions, transactions going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose tying it back to the theme that we are talking about in terms of how is it linked to movies, I think that it's then down to the producers and the directors to then sensationalize this person behind the computer trying to launch all the scripts and the millimeters and all that, right? And then having all this green screen or whatever that tells you that, oh, all the bubbles that's coming up. I don't know, but the reality of this is that it is hard work though, because the people who comes out with the script, the people who then goes in to say, if this plus this plus this gives you an abnormally, how the producers and the directors will then have to be able to decode to say, how do I translate this to a film where you and I as laymen can understand?
Yeah. I think both of you brought up interesting points, right? Because when we look at fraud, financial fraud, accounting fraud, we know that there are three elements, right, in the triangle: rationalization, incentives, right, and opportunity, right? And so that doesn't change. But obviously the avenues, the circumstances, perhaps the acceleration of AI and technology, actually it can serve both the perpetrator, the criminal, and the investigator, right?
Yes.
So as you think that the acceleration of AI is assisting your investigation techniques, it's also assisting.
Both ways.
Yeah, it works both ways, right? And so I guess my question back to Belinda is, in your experience, and this is also linking a bit back to what I talk about the media programs, right? It's always good versus evil, good and bad, good cop, bad cop, right? That kind of thing. So in the context of the work that you have done, right, as you investigate, and in particular specific investigations where you know that I think this is the guy, right? How often is it that the investigator trumps the perpetrator? Or how often is it that sometimes people actually walk away and you don't discover anything? I mean, like, who wins? That's my question. Like, in your experience, who wins most of the time?
To be honest, Victor, I don't see it as who win or lose. It's more of when the client hires you for a purpose. And one of the things that we usually will ask the client is, what are your objectives, or what are you hoping to achieve? Are you hoping to, once you prove wrongdoings or otherwise, then get rid of the person? Or are you thinking about then pursuing the case in a trial, in a court? Or do you want to hand it over to the police? Because the objective of it kind of determine what are the things that you want to do. So to me, it's not so much about I win or I lose, but it's more of me being able to solve the client's problem. And most of the time when the clients come to us, probably panic button may have dropped off, or maybe in a state where they say, Lem, please prove to me or show me how bad the situation is and how long has it been going on, where has it gone to, who else is involved, because I don't even know who to trust. And because it could be one person, but we know for a fact that for a crime to perpetrate over the extent of the time, the quantum, unlikely the person operates on its own. And so over the years, the longer it is, the more people will be involved. And when you go into the situation, you wouldn't know who are the people that is, are they involved or they're not. And so the sensing on the ground is quite important. And then by the same token, it comes back to piecing the picture together, where you say, when I look at books and records, when I look at my evidence on electronic, my chats, my emails, my documents that I exchange, things like this, then it's once again back to piecing that picture together. And in most of the case, I would like to then say that, at least you go back to the client to say, look, this is what we have found, when, how, why, and then at least we go and so-called bottom it out in that sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there were cases where we can then clear the person's name in that sense and say that I haven't seen anything as far as this evidence are concerned to suggest that he has taken the money like what you said. And then by the same token, we have actually gone back to say, I'm sorry, it's a lot bigger than you think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it to me, it's more about achieving the client's objective than winning or losing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's
because not getting the evidence, that means the person is innocent probably.
Yeah. Or so sophisticated that the person is able to hide the trail that even you and I can't find, which is quite Unlikely. Sometimes the person is so, I suppose the people who are so sophisticated are the people who are still, the crime is still undetected at the moment. And like what you say, if you are deploying technology, it cuts both ways. It will help us, so-called Minority Report, right? Since we're talking about films, so-called about the Minority Report where I can preempt what's going to come. I can also play the other side where I can use technology to then go undetected. Yeah.
Just for our millennial and Gen Z viewers, Minority Report is a very old movie. Cruise.
Sorry, the sign of
exposes our vintage again.
So, okay, this is almost getting to my closing question, but to set the context for it, one of the things that I picked up from the two of you, from the sharing from the two of you, is that I think there are a couple of elements at play, and I'm interested to know from each of you how you feel about this next part where I'm going to describe to you. When I'm watching one of these shows, right, because we're talking about media, film, TV programs, I will often, usually it's a 40-minute episode with 20 minutes of advertisements, right? So as the timing is, as the episode progresses, I'm by the 17th minute, I'm like, no, this guy did it. Oh no, I'm sure it's this guy. Right? This same feeling translates to cases that we might be reading about in our newspapers. I'm sure this guy did it, So sometimes there's this, even like you said, the psychology of the investigator. There might be a intuition, there might be a vibe, a feeling, a gut feel. I think it's him. But on the other hand, you guys have also said, since the advent of your initial machine AI learning until now, where you have generative AI and where it's accelerating, it produces more irrefutable hard fact as well. So there's hard evidence, numbers, documentation, be it virtual or physical. But then there's also that vibe element, that intuition. So maybe back to you, and then after for you to close. How do you balance these two things? What is this equilibrium that you feel is critical to your area of work?
That's a tough question. Because for me, maybe because of my training since day one, it's always based on evidence and that hunch. I would say that in the past, I will place more emphasis on the hunch, and with the hunch, it then spur me to do certain things.
Pursue that evidence.
Yeah. But come to think of it, today, what we did is the hunch then helped us design our plan, investigation plan. Okay, so the way I look at it is this. If as I investigate and as I have more information and I will start having hunch of what could have taken place, so that from an investigation standpoint means we will then have to tweak our investigation steps, technique, so that we prove or disprove, what the hunch is. And that over the course of the investigation will get us sharper and sharper to the objective that we want to achieve. So I would say in the past, more of a hunch as in, more affecting me. But now, after all these years, the hunch will probably help me to shape my investigation plan so that I can get the hard evidence, whether to prove or disprove any wrongdoing.
Lisa?
I think for me personally, when I embark on this looking for stolen beans journey, a lot of it still comes back to the evidence for me. So I will typically ask the clients, what are your concerns? What's your worry? What are the things that's keeping you awake? And then having to then say that here are the areas that we can assist you to bottom it out or solve the question, right? Or solve the problem. And as we start to, like what Lem says, as we start to unravel and go down a path where they say possibly a procurement fraud, or possibly cash manipulation or financial statements manipulation, things like that. Then when you are going down and you are looking at your books and records and your evidence already, it will start to unravel and answer certain questions as the evidence starts to point in certain hypotheses. And it starts to say that, okay, it could possibly be as a result of certain situations not having it, therefore they bump up the revenue, and therefore the revenue is fake. Yeah. So if we go down this path about saying that my sales is not true, then the next question is, I will ask how much. So at least it's then saying that, oh, currently your sales is 200 million. Is my entire 200 million fake, or are there portion of it that's fake? And then we dwindle down, and then we say, okay, from the suggestions of this is how I build the case. There will be certain portions of it that says that, okay, I think the hypothesis might be if your sales is fake, likelihood is, because accountants so you have to then have double entries and all that. Then how does the other leg of the entry goes? AR, cash. Okay, so something has to give. So it goes back to this point about hypothesis, and then saying that, okay, if my AR is fake, then who are the ARs that is fake? And then how do I then dabble into it to then say that, okay, when did this fellow come in as my AR? The fellow come in as your AR last month, and then the person suddenly has got 200 million AR that you think, how come I'm doing business with this person? This person is just incorporated, but the person owes me 200 million. The person has just signed a contract with me, even though the office just started. Something is fishy, right? So in terms of that hunch, like borrowing Lem's words, right? I would then say that the thing will point you to the hypothesis that you've got, but then it's then backed up by evidence. Then what I will do is then I'll go and find out, oh, the contract was signed last month. Then why did I go and do transactions with this person for 200 million? And where's this person's office? And what's the payout capital? Things like this. So it goes back to the point about evidence and supporting documentation. Yeah.
So this one is more fact, evidence-based. Makes sense. Well, thank you for all your sharing. I mean, even for me, it's a very illuminating.
Thank you.
Curious.
Thank you.
Again, I want to thank Lem and Belinda for this
Thank you,
session.
Victor.
Thank
Thank you
you
for
viewers
having
for
us.
watching another session of
Thank
Sparkling
you.
Conversations. Thank you, everyone.